What if a man's final gift to his children wasn't money, but a curse? After a lifetime of quiet sacrifice, 68-year-old David is just a burden to his successful, impatient children. They only see the cost of his care, not the father who raised them. On one silent, wreckage-strewn Christmas night, David overhears their cruel, calculating plans for him. And something inside him finally breaks. He decides his legacy won't be love or money. It will be a devastating lesson they can never forget. And after his final, shocking act, his children are about to discover that the real debt isn't the one you leave behind. It's the one you carry forever. Disclaimer: this channel features fictional psychological stories created for emotional exploration and storytelling purposes. All characters and events are fictional. The last car door slammed, a hollow thump that echoed through the empty house like a final nail. And then there was only David, 68 years old, and the wreckage of Christmas. The silence was thick, a living thing that settled over the confetti of wrapping paper and the greasy skeletons of plates. He stood in the doorway to the living room, one hand pressed into the small of his back. The ache there was a constant companion, a dull toothache of a pain that flared when he bent, when he lifted, when he breathed too deeply. He looked at the room. His grandchildren's expensive, glittering gifts, a robot that could dance, a sleek tablet in a neon case, had been abandoned on the sofa. A half-eaten gingerbread man lay face down on the rug. Cigarette ash, not his own, dusted the hearth like gray snow. He moved slowly, a ship navigating its own debris. Each plate he cleared from the dining table was a weight. The crystal wine glasses, which had chimed with toasts to family and togetherness just hours before, now felt slick and dangerous in his hands. He filled the sink with hot, sudsy water, watching the greasy rainbows swirl. From upstairs, a faint, rhythmic sound drifted down, the raspy, uneven breath of his mother. It was the soundtrack of his life, that breath, a metronome, ticking off the seconds of his vigil. As he wiped a smear of cranberry sauce from the tablecloth, he heard the low murmur of voices from the living room. Anna, Ben, and Chris. They thought he was still in the kitchen, lost in the clatter of dishes. David went still, a dirty plate in one hand, a damp cloth in the other. And every single time, Anna was saying, her voice a strained whisper, "It's just a list. The back pain, the insomnia, how Grandma ate 2 spoonfuls today instead of 3. It's like a guilt checklist. I can't even enjoy my own house when I get back. I just feel awful." A chair creaked, Ben's voice, flatter, colder. "Awful? Why? He's laying it on thick. Living in this old place, how's he even affording her meds? You watch, next visit, it'll be about money for a nurse. We have our own lives, Anna. Mortgages, kids' tuition. It's not sustainable," Chris said, his tone the reasonable, boardroom finality he used to end discussions. "We need a proper family meeting tomorrow. We have to redistribute the financial responsibility and the care hours, clearly. And Mike," he said the name of their youngest brother, the freelance artist, like it was a problem to be solved. "Mike has to step up. He can't keep playing the broke artist card. It's not fair to the rest of us." In the dark kitchen, David's fingers tightened around the cloth. He could feel the cheap cotton straining. The warm, soapy water dripped from his wrist onto the floor. But he didn't move. The hurt came first, a sharp, bright stab behind his eyes. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear smoke, but then something else washed over it, colder and heavier, pushing the hurt down until it drowned. His face, tired and sagging a moment before, seemed to harden. The light in his eyes, the little that was left, didn't go out, but turned glassy and still. He didn't cry. He felt a hollow cold spread from the center of his chest out to his fingers and toes, as if his blood had been replaced with winter. He finished the plate in silence, dried it, put it away. He moved like an automaton, each movement precise and empty. Then he turned off the kitchen light and walked towards the stairs, avoiding the living room archway where his children's shadows moved. The climb was a slow, painful pilgrimage. He paused outside her door, the wood worn smooth by his hand, and he pushed it open. The room smelled of menthol, of old skin, of time running out. A nightlight shaped like a seashell cast a weak, watery glow. In the bed, his mother was a small bundle of bones and thin blanket. 98 years had folded her in on herself. Her mouth was open, her breath a faint, struggling whistle. He stood there, looking at her. He thought about sitting, about adjusting her blanket, about checking the water glass on the nightstand. He even reached a hand out. But he stopped. He looked at his own hand, suspended in the dim light. It was spotted with age, the veins raised, the knuckles swollen. This hand had held bottles for his babies, had steadied bikes, had signed report cards. Now it was just the hand that doled out pills, that changed sheets, that lifted a frail body onto a commode. He looked from his mother's shriveled form to the parade of amber prescription bottles on the dresser. He saw the chipped paint on the windowsill, the faded floral wallpaper. This room, this woman, this entire crumbling house, it was his kingdom, a kingdom of burden. And his heirs, his princes and princesses downstairs, weren't preparing to take the crown. They were holding a council to discuss the kingdom's annoying liabilities. He was no longer their father. He was a pre-existing condition, a problem in a worn-out sweater, soon to require a financial and logistical solution. The weight of it pressed down on him, heavier than any physical ache. The years of tying ties, of helping with homework, of quiet pride at graduations, it all crumbled into dust, meaningless. He was stuck in the middle, a forgotten bridge between a past that couldn't remember him and a future that was already calculating his cost. David stood up. He didn't look at his mother again. He walked out, pulling the door closed with a soft, final click. He stood on the dark landing, looking down into the deeper darkness of the house below. A car engine started outside, headlights sweeping across the wall as one of his children left. Then another. Soon, the only light was the ghostly blue street lamp glow through the front window. The cold inside him had crystallized. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was a clear, sharp, and terrifying resolve. He whispered into the stillness, the words dry as old paper. "They're not worth it, Mom. I'm so tired." And in that perfect, silent emptiness, a thought formed. Not a hot, raging idea, but a cold, clear plan, solid as ice. He would give his children one last Christmas gift. It wouldn't be love or warmth or a happy memory. It would be a lesson about inheritance they would never, ever forget. The voicemail arrived just after 9 in the morning, a digital ghost knocking on 3 separate phones at once. Anna was scrubbing a yogurt stain off her toddler's high chair. Ben was scrolling through mortgage rates on his tablet. Chris was in his home office, already on a video call, his smile professional and tight. David's voice came through not as a whisper, not choked with tears, but with a terrifying, flat calm. It was the sound of a man reading a weather report for a place he'd already left. "Hello, my children. If you're hearing this, then your father and your grandmother have found some peace. Don't look for a reason. Don't cry. Save that energy for dividing up what's left." There was a soft click, then silence. In her sunny kitchen, Anna's sponge dropped into the sink with a wet plop. Her hand, wet and cold, flew to her mouth, but no sound came out. She just stared at the phone on the counter as if it had grown teeth. Ben's tablet slipped from his hands, clattering onto the glass coffee table. He didn't move to pick it up. He sat perfectly still, the blood draining from his face, leaving his skin the color of old paper. On Chris's video call, his colleague asked, "Chris, you okay? You just went white." Chris fumbled, his fingers numb, and hit the end call button without a word, plunging his office into a sudden, heavy quiet. For about 30 seconds, there was only shock, a pure empty ringing in their heads. Then, as if a starter's pistol had fired, they all moved at once. Anna grabbed her car keys, her purse, shouting a jumbled excuse to her confused husband about an emergency. Ben was already in his car, reversing out of the driveway so fast the tires squealed on the asphalt. Chris was pulling on his coat, his mind already leaping past the horrifying image his father's words painted, towards the next practical step. The three-way call connected as they merged onto the highway from different parts of town. "Are you driving?" Chris's voice was sharp. "All business?" "Ben, Anna." "Yeah," Ben breathed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I'm on the expressway. Me too, Anna said, her voice trembling. Oh God, Chris, what did he do? Chris ignored the question. Listen, we need to think clearly. The house? Who's it even under? Mom's name, then his? Did he ever put it in a trust? There was a beat of silence, filled only by the hum of their car engines. It wasn't a silence of grief. It was the tense, calculating silence of people running numbers in their heads. It was always just theirs, Ben said finally, his voice regaining its usual cool edge. Then just his, no trust, a will, maybe. Did he ever mention a will to anyone? He never mentioned anything except his back pain and her medicine, Anna said, and the words came out with a bitter, almost accusatory twist. Okay, Chris said, plowing forward. Savings. Did he have any? He was always hinting he was broke, but that house is paid off. There must be something. Life insurance, Ben cut in, the words quick and sure. That's the key. He had a policy from his old job. He told me once. Years ago, he said, at least when I go, it'll be clean. I thought he was just being morbid. A strange collective energy buzzed over the line. It wasn't relief. It was the thrill of discovering an asset. Who's the beneficiary, Anna asked. Probably split between us, Chris reasoned. But we need the policy details. And the death, the manner. Will that affect the payout? He didn't say the words suicide or murder-suicide. He didn't have to. They were all thinking it. A dark, unspoken cloud in each of their cars. The conversation swirled. Probate, funeral costs, who would have to take time off work to deal with the mess. Not one of them said, I can't believe he's gone. Not one of them whispered, poor Dad. The grief, if it was there, was buried under an avalanche of urgent, cold practicality. Their father's last request, to divide what was left, was the only part of his message they were following with any devotion. They arrived at the old house within minutes of each other, their cars screeching to a haphazard stop on the driveway and lawn. The house looked ordinary in the gray winter light. Quiet. The Christmas wreath was still on the door. No one had a key. Ben threw his shoulder against the front door. It held. Chris found the flower pot by the steps, the one their mother had always used, and underneath, slick with cold damp, was the spare key. His hands were steady as he slid it into the lock. The door swung open onto the silent, stale-aired living room. The remains of their Christmas party still haunted the space. A forgotten glass, a stray ribbon. The silence was absolute, a thick, woolly blanket that swallowed sound. Without a word, driven by a single dreadful purpose, they moved as one unit toward the stairs. Their footsteps on the creaky wood were the only noise, a loud drumbeat in the hush. The door to the grandmother's room was closed. Anna reached for the knob, her hand shaking now, the full weight of the moment finally hitting her muscles. She pushed it open. The scene inside was peacefully arranged, horribly peaceful. David lay on the narrow bed beside his mother. He was dressed in his best shirt and slacks. He had one arm around her frail shoulders, and her small, bird-like hand was nestled in his. Their heads were close together on the pillow. They could have been sleeping, a son finally resting beside the mother he had cared for so long, a picture of devoted peace. But the air was wrong. It was still and cold and empty of life. It didn't feel like sleep. It felt like a museum exhibit. The stillness was absolute, screaming. The three of them stood frozen in the doorway, a tableau of children witnessing the terrible, finished artwork of their father's despair. The greed, the calculations, the frantic energy of the car ride. It all drained away, leaving them hollow. Anna's breath hitched. She took a half step forward, her eyes wide, scanning the scene, the two still forms, the arranged hands, the terrible serenity of it. Her mind, trained for years on pediatrician appointments and mortgage payments and the cost of daycare, tried to process the horror. It searched for a file to put it in, a practical next step. Her lips parted, the first words out of her mouth in a high, thin whisper of pure, unthinking practicality were not a wail, not a prayer. Oh my God, she breathed, staring at her father's composed, lifeless face. Does life insurance even pay out for something like this? The next few hours were a blur of official, somber faces. Police officers spoke in low, respectful tones. A doctor, looking weary beyond his years, confirmed what they already knew. The words used were clinical and kind. Peaceful, no signs of struggle, likely an overdose of his mother's medication combined with his own. It was labeled a tragedy, a quiet double suicide born from caregiver exhaustion. The officials treated the family with kid gloves, offering pamphlets on grief counseling as they packed up their notepads. The moment the front door closed behind the last uniformed stranger, the air in the house changed. The respectful silence evaporated, replaced by a crackling, urgent tension. It was as if a whistle had blown. Anna, Ben, and Chris migrated to the dining room table like iron filings pulled by a magnet. The same table they'd eaten Christmas dinner at, now just a piece of furniture in a crime scene. Chris didn't sit. He placed his palms flat on the wood, leaning forward, assuming the position. "All right," he said, his voice no longer the one he had used with the police. It was his project manager voice. "We need transparency, now, before anything gets misplaced." Ben, already scrolling through his phone looking up probate law, nodded without looking up. "Absolutely, a full inventory." "What do you mean?" Anna asked, but her eyes were already darting toward the old roll-top desk in the corner, their father's desk. Chris's gaze lifted from the table and traveled meaningfully toward the ceiling, toward the second floor where, somewhere, their youngest brother Mike was presumably still in shock. "I mean, we searched the house. Systematically. Every drawer, every box. We find the will, the deed, the insurance policies, the bank books. All of it. We do it together. That way," he said, the words heavy with implication, "no one can be accused of hiding anything later." It was less a suggestion, more a declaration of war. A preemptive strike against mistrust that hadn't even fully formed yet. They were about to get up, a grim search party ready to ransack their father's memories, when the stairs creaked. Mike came down slowly. He looked like he'd been hit by a truck. His eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, his face pale and slack. He'd been upstairs alone with the reality of it, while the others had been downstairs rehearsing their roles for the authorities and now for each other. He stood at the edge of the living room, looking at the three of them huddled at the dining table like a board of directors. "The police are gone?" he asked, his voice thick. "Yeah," Chris said, his posture not relaxing an inch. Mike swallowed hard. He looked at the floor, then back at them. "So, what do we do now? About them? We should plan the funerals. Dad and Grandma. They deserve a proper send-off, don't you think? Something respectful." A beat of silence hung in the air. Anna looked down, picking at a cuticle. Ben let out a small, almost imperceptible snort through his nose, his eyes still on his phone. Chris stared at Mike with an expression of pure, undiluted incredulity. It was the look you give someone who was just asked, in the middle of a bank heist, what time the library closes. "With what money, Mike?" Ben said, finally looking up. His voice wasn't unkind, just brutally factual. "A proper send-off costs thousands, tens of thousands." "Who's paying for that? You?" Mike flinched. I don't have it, but there must be something. We could all contribute." "Contribute?" Chris cut in, his patience a thin veneer. "Mike, we haven't even found out if there is any money to pay for this, let alone anything left over. We can't just throw good money after situation." He couldn't bring himself to say after dead people. But they all heard it. "But it's Dad," Mike said, his voice breaking a little, "and Grandma. And they're gone," Ben stated, the finality chilling. "Spending a fortune won't bring them back. It'll just leave us all poorer." He tapped his phone. "Cremation is the most reasonable option, by far. Burial is a waste of land and money. We can do a simple memorial service at the funeral home. Basic package." Anna nodded, quick little bird-like nods. She saw the logic. It was tidy. It was cost-effective. "Right," she said, her voice finding a practical, sisterly tone aimed at Mike. "It's more sensible, Mike. We have to be sensible now. Whatever money is left after the basics are covered, we can divide it fairly." Mike just stood there, looking from one face to another. He saw no shared sorrow, no collective desire to honor the dead. He saw a budgeting committee. The raw grief on his face seemed out of place, a messy emotion that had no spreadsheet column. No one moved to search the house yet. They were all, suddenly, frozen in this new agreement. Ben's suggestion hung in the air, accepted without a vote. Cremation, simple, cheap. And so, while 2 coffins hadn't even been ordered yet, The battle over the imaginary inheritance officially began. It wasn't fought with shouts or tears, but with spreadsheets yet to be made, with side glances at the desk, and with the silent, unanimous decision that mourning was a luxury they couldn't afford. They turned the house inside out. It wasn't a search anymore. It was an excavation. Dust flew from the attic as Ben shoved aside boxes of old National Geographic magazines and Christmas decorations from a happier time. Anna rifled through every drawer in the bedroom dresser, her hands growing frantic, pushing past neatly folded sweaters and socks with holes in them. Chris took the study apart with surgical precision, emptying the filing cabinet onto the floor, creating a snowdrift of paper. The hope that bright, greedy little flame flickered with each passing hour. Ben found the metal lockbox first, hidden under a loose floorboard in the closet. His heart did a stupid, hopeful leap. He carried it downstairs like a treasure chest, setting it on the dining table with a thud that brought the others running. Chris produced a screwdriver, and with a few sharp twists, the cheap lock gave way. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single blue passbook from a bank that had merged with another bank years ago. Anna snatched it up, her fingers trembling as she flipped it open. The entries told a story in reverse. Small deposits a decade ago, then nothing but withdrawals. The final line, dated 2 months prior, was a withdrawal for $50, the balance $215.67. $200? Ben whispered, the word sounding ridiculous. That's it? That can't be it, Chris said, grabbing the box and upending it over the table. A single tarnished silver dollar from 1906 clattered out, spinning in a wobbly circle before falling flat, nothing else. The rest of the day was a descent into a paper hell. The filing cabinet didn't hold stocks or bonds. It held a monument to slow, grinding need. Folder after folder, thick as phone books, stuffed with medical bills, statements from cardiologists, neurologists, physical therapists. Explanation of benefits forms with horrifying numbers in the patient responsibility column. Pharmacy receipts for medications with names no one could pronounce. Final notices from utility companies, politely worded threats on crisp yellow paper. Letters from a debt consolidation company, offering help that clearly never came. Chris sat on the floor, surrounded by the evidence, a spreadsheet open on his laptop. His fingers flew over the keys, not adding assets but subtracting liabilities. His face, usually so controlled, went slack. He liquidated his 401k 3 years ago, he said, his voice hollow. He held up a statement. The entire thing. Gone. A pause as he clicked open a PDF from the county. And the house, it's not free and clear. He took out a reverse mortgage last year, a big one. The words hung in the air, heavier than the dust. A reverse mortgage. It meant the bank owned most of the house now. When they sold it, the bank would take its huge chunk first. Whatever pitiful scraps were left would go to pay the medical debts. There would be nothing. Less than nothing. Anna had been quietly seething, clutching the pathetic passbook. The reality of it. The years of his hints, his tired eyes, his complaints they'd dismissed as manipulation, crashed down on her not as guilt, but as a personal, furious insult. All this drama, this horrific, messy exit, and he had the audacity to leave them with bills? She shot to her feet, the chair screeching behind her. That's it! She shrieked, her voice raw and cracking. The sound was so loud in the dead house it made Mike, who had been silently watching from the doorway, flinch. He kills himself and Grandma and doesn't even leave us anything? Not $1? Just a house full of debt and a mess to clean up? What was the point? Her face was red, twisted in a rage that had no target but the ghost of her father. The disappointment was volcanic, erupting as pure selfish fury. In the ringing silence that followed her outburst, Mike slowly pushed himself away from the doorframe. He looked exhausted, beaten down by the grief on one side and this ugly spectacle on the other. He walked to the coat rack by the front door, reached into the pocket of his worn jacket, and pulled out a plain white envelope. It was slightly crumpled. He walked back to the table and placed it gently in the center, on top of a pile of unpaid hospital bills. It's not completely nothing, he said, his voice quiet. He gave me this, the night of the party, when everyone else was leaving. He swallowed. He just put it in my hand, squeezed my fingers around it, didn't say anything. All eyes locked onto the envelope. Chris reached for it, but Mike didn't let go. Not yet. I opened it this morning, Mike continued. It's $800, cash. I think it was everything he had in his wallet. Everything that wasn't in that bank book. He looked at his siblings, his eyes begging them to understand something. I was going to say we should use it. For the funerals, for something decent for them. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. They just stared at the envelope. This pathetic, tangible scrap of their father's last act. The emotions that flashed across Anna's, Ben's, and Chris's faces weren't disappointment anymore. That had burned away, leaving something hotter and uglier. It was suspicion, sharp as a knife. Why Mike? Why did he get it? And then, rising like a tide, a scorching, righteous anger. How dare he try to play the good son now? How dare he hide this? Ben was the first to move. He leaned across the table, his palm open, face set in a hard, unyielding mask. Give it here, Mike, he said, his voice cold and flat. That money isn't yours. It's part of the estate. It goes into the common pot, to be divided fairly. His hand stayed there, waiting, in the space above the mountain of their father's failures. The funeral was a masterclass in austerity. They chose the Eternal Peace Basic package, which included 2 plain urns, one slightly chipped but offered at a 10% discount, a 10-minute slot in the funeral home's smallest Serenity Chapel, and a clergyman who read from a generic script because none of the children could provide any personal details about their father's faith. The flowers were a sad, wilty mix of carnations and baby's breath, the cheapest sympathy bouquet from the grocery store. The entire affair felt less like a farewell and more like the hurried disposal of evidence. Online, however, it was a different story. Anna posted a beautifully filtered photo of her father from 20 years ago, his arm around her at her college graduation. Her caption was a novel. They say a father's love is a forever compass. Mine guided me, sacrificed silently, and taught me what true strength is. The silence in my heart is deafening. We were supposed to have more time. Hashtag family first, hashtag grief, my hero. She received over 300 hearts and a waterfall of praying for you comments. Ben shared a stock image of a dimly lit hallway with a quote about law superimposed over it. His message was shorter, more masculine in its grief. Lost my rock today, the man who showed me how to stand tall. Nothing will be the same. Hold your loved ones close. His business contacts and golf buddies flooded the post with handshake and salute emojis. Chris went for a professional yet poignant angle, a black and white photo of his father's old, leather-bound dictionary on a desk. The greatest teacher I ever had wasn't in a classroom. He was at the kitchen table, patient and kind. Now I have to navigate this world without my guiding star. The lessons remain. Legacy, father-son. It was dignified, it was touching, and it garnered respectful comments from his colleagues and clients who saw a new, sensitive side to him. The chapel on the day of the service was cold, both in temperature and in atmosphere. A handful of elderly neighbors and a few distant cousins sat scattered on the vinyl pews. The air smelled of lemon-scented disinfectant and damp carpet. Mike sat in the front row, his hands clasped between his knees, staring at the 2 simple urns on the stand. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Anna, Ben, and Chris sat beside him, a united front of sorrow. Anna dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue. Ben's jaw was clenched, the picture of stoic pain. Chris wore a somber, dignified expression, occasionally putting a comforting hand on Anna's shoulder for the benefit of anyone watching. The hired pastor finished his generic remarks about the journey home and eternal rest. He then turned, as per the script, to the family. Would anyone from the family like to come forward and share a memory of David, to celebrate the life he lived? A heavy, expectant silence fell. Anna looked at her lap. Ben studied his shoes. Chris, feeling the weight of his role as the eldest present, took a slow breath and stood up. He walked to the podium, adjusting his tie. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice smooth and practiced. My father was a good man, a quiet man. He believed in hard work and providing for his family. He taught us the value of responsibility. He paused, searching the air for the right canned phrase. He's at peace now, with his mother. And while our hearts are broken, we know he would want us to carry on, to be strong as he was. It was perfectly fine, perfectly empty. A speech that could have been for anyone's father. As Chris paused for a somber breath, a noise came from the back of the chapel. A chair scraped. Old Mr. Johnson, their neighbor for 40 years, heaved himself to his feet. His face, usually kindly, was flushed with a deep, trembling anger. "I'll share a memory," he said, his voice cracking but loud enough to fill the silent room. He didn't walk to the podium. He just stood in his pew, pointing a bony finger toward the front. "I saw David every single day. I saw him struggle. I saw him break his back caring for that poor woman upstairs. And you know what else I saw?" The room froze. Chris stood at the podium, paralyzed. "I saw you," Mr. Johnson spat, his eyes sweeping over Anna, Ben, and Chris. "Once a year, at Christmas. With your store-bought pies and your fancy cars you couldn't wait to get back to. You have any idea what he lived on so he could afford her medicine? Macaroni and cheese from a box, for weeks, while you posted pictures of your steak dinners." A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the small crowd. Anna's face turned a blotchy, scarlet red. Ben stared straight ahead, his neck rigid, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Chris looked down at his prepared notes, as if they might offer an escape. The silence that followed was humiliating. It was filled with the neighbors' sudden understanding, their disapproving stares burning into the backs of the siblings' heads. Then Mike stood up. He didn't look at Mr. Johnson with anger. He gave the old man a small, tired nod of gratitude. He walked to the podium, gently nudging his shell-shocked brother aside. Chris sank back into his seat, defeated. Mike didn't adjust the microphone. He just looked at the urns, then at the few people who had come. "When I was 7, Mike said, his voice rough but clear, my dad helped me build a rocket for the science fair. We made it out of the cardboard tubes and aluminum foil. He called them fireworks made of silver foil. It was lopsided and it never flew. But he sat with me in the garage every night for a week, glue and paint everywhere." A real fragile smile touched Mike's lips for a second. He kept it. It was in the attic. That's the kind of man he was. He kept the lopsided stuff. He showed up for the messy parts. The contrast was devastating. Chris's hollow platitudes, then Mr. Johnson's furious truth, and now Mike's simple, painful memory of love. The disapproval in the room for the others solidified into something colder, contempt. In the thick, accusing silence, a sound chirped. It was bright, cheerful, and utterly out of place. A smartphone notification. All eyes flicked to Anna. She flinched, fumbling in her purse to silence the offending device. She glanced at the screen. A text preview flashed. "So sorry for your loss, Anna. Thinking of you. Let's connect next week about the Q4 numbers when you're ready." It was from a major client. A complex wave of emotion crossed Anna's face. Embarrassment, then a flicker of professional interest, then a swift automatic calculation about her career. And there, for just half a second, as she read the words of potential business continuity, a tiny, relieved, and utterly unconscious smile touched the corners of her mouth before she could wipe it away. The house felt even emptier after the urns were placed on the mantel. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was waiting. A week after the discount funeral, the waiting ended. A car, an old sedan polished to a dull shine, crunched up the driveway. The man who got out wore a suit that had been fashionable 20 years ago. He carried a briefcase that was more scarred than leather. He introduced himself as Mr. Gable, an attorney. Not a big corporate lawyer, but the kind who did wills for regular people in a small office above a pharmacy. David's lawyer. He was ushered into the living room, the same room where they'd had Christmas, where they'd searched for treasure. Anna, Ben, Chris, and Mike sat across from him, a tense little audience. Hope, that stubborn weed, poked through the concrete of their disappointment. Maybe there was a hidden account, a safety deposit box. A final twist. Mr. Gable didn't open his briefcase immediately. He looked at them, his eyes tired and knowing behind thick glasses. "Your father came to me 6 months ago," he said, his voice dry as old paper. "He gave me this." He finally clicked the latches open and drew out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope sealed with heavy tape. His instructions were clear. I was to deliver it to all four of you together after his passing and after the funeral. He placed the envelope on the coffee table between them. It lay there, innocuous and heavy with promise. Ben leaned forward. "Is it the will?" "It is his final communication," Mr. Gable said carefully. "He called it his true accounting date." Chris reached for it, but the lawyer held up a hand. "I'll leave you to it. My job is only to deliver it, and to convey one additional message afterward." He rose, giving a small, stiff nod, and retreated to the foyer to wait, a silent, ominous sentinel. The moment he was gone, Chris tore the envelope open. Instead of crisp legal paper, he pulled out a simple black composition notebook, the kind a child uses for school. The cover was worn at the corners, the pages swollen from use. Frowning, Chris flipped it open. The handwriting was their father's, neat at first, then growing more ragged, sometimes shaky, as the pages went on. It wasn't a will, it was a diary. The entries spanned the last 5 years. "What is this?" Anna whispered, peering over his arm. Chris began to read a random entry aloud, his voice flat at first. September 12th. Called Anna today. She sounded busy, said she'd try to come Sunday to help sort Mom's medications. She canceled. Text said she had a wellness spa day already booked. Non-refundable. Mom wet the bed again this morning. The washing machine is making a clunking sound. Anna's face, which had been etched with polite anticipation, went perfectly still. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving 2 bright spots of red high on her bones. She remembered that spa day. She'd posted a picture of the cucumber water. Ben snatched the book, his eyes scanning. He found his own name. May 3rd, Ben came by, unexpected, handed me $50 in cash, said, "Get yourself and Mom something nice. Don't tell the others I did this." Felt like tipping a waiter. Used it to buy her adult diapers, the good kind. She cried when I changed her today. Not from pain, from shame. Ben's hand holding the notebook began to tremble. A vein pulsed in his temple. The memory of that day, of his own performative, secret charity, curdled in his stomach. Chris took the book back, his composure cracking. He flipped further, his movements becoming frantic. November 17th. Chris on the phone. "Practical solution," he says. "Found a long-term care facility in West Virginia. Much more affordable. Sent me a link. The reviews mention bed sores and missing medications. It's a 5-hour drive." He said, "We have to be realistic, Dad." Realistic, a fancy word for far away. Chris stopped reading. The words seemed to burn on the page. His practical solution laid bare as the act of exile it was. Mike, who had been sitting with his head in his hands, looked up. Tears were already streaking his face. "Keep reading," he said, his voice choked. "The end." Chris, his face ashen, turned to the last entry. Christmas Eve. The handwriting here was different. Steady, terribly, frighteningly clear. Teh. "Today is Christmas. They came back. They ate my food, drank my wine, patted my shoulder like I was a tired dog. I watched their eyes. Not when they looked at me, but when they glanced at the stairs, when they looked at Mother's empty chair. It wasn't worry I saw. It wasn't love. It was an assessment, an appraisal. They were checking the foundation for cracks, counting the silverware. They are not my children anymore. They are strangers waiting for an inheritance. So I will leave them the most valuable thing I have left. Shame." The word shame was written in all caps, the pen dug so deep into the paper it had nearly torn through. The notebook slipped from Chris's numb fingers and thudded onto the carpet. No one moved to pick it up. Anna's breath came in short, sharp hiccups. Ben stared at the wall, his jaw working, his eyes wide and unseeing. Chris simply sat, hollowed out, the elegant facade finally shattered. Mike wept openly, shoulders shaking, for the father who had felt so alone. The sound of Mr. Gable clearing his throat from the doorway made them all jump. He had returned, silent as a ghost. He looked at the broken notebook on the floor, at their shattered faces. "My final message from your father," the old lawyer said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "He instructed me to retain a scanned copy of that journal. Should any of you engage in public disputes over the estate, or create what he called ungrateful noise, I am to send the full scan to the editor of the local newspaper. The Gazette does still run a local lives column, I believe." He gave them one last, long look, turned on his heel, and let himself out. The front door closed behind him with a soft, final click. The sound seemed to unlock them. Ben stood up so fast his chair tipped over backwards with a crash. He didn't write it. He just walked stiffly toward the hall, then broke into a run, his footsteps pounding up the stairs. A bedroom door slammed shut. Anna let out a choked sound, somewhere between a sob and a scream, fumbled for her purse, and fled outside into the cold afternoon light. Chris remained in his chair, staring at the notebook on the floor as if it were a poisonous snake. He didn't cry, he didn't rage, he just sat, exposed in the terrible, silent courtroom his father had built. The door to the living room seemed to swing shut on its own, leaving him alone in the dim room, face to face with the rotting reflection of his own soul. The house had become a prison. The diary sat on the mantel between the two urns, a third, more frightening relic. They tried to ignore it, but its truth had a way of leaking out. It was Anna's 15-year-old daughter, Chloe, who opened the cell door. She'd come over with Anna one last time to collect some of her grandmother's old costume jewelry, a final sentimental scavenger hunt. Bored, left alone in the living room, she'd picked up the black notebook. She'd read about the spa day, about her mother's broken promises. She read about her Uncle Ben's $50 tip. She read her father's suggestion to ship her great-grandmother to West Virginia. Chloe didn't cry. She got angry, a pure teenage righteous anger. She took pictures, not of the whole thing, just the most damning passages. That evening, from the privacy of her bedroom, she posted them, not to her main profile, but to a small private story for her closest friends, captioned, "My family is a lie. My grandpa died of this." It took less than 3 hours. A friend showed a parent. The parent called another parent. A cousin saw it, saved the images, and sent them to an aunt. By midnight, the grainy photos of the shaky handwriting were everywhere in their small town's digital bloodstream. On neighborhood Facebook groups disguised as outrage. "Can you believe the cruelty?" In text chains between church ladies, "I always thought those kids seemed a bit too polished." The local online news forum had a thread titled, "The Family First Hypocrites. Read the dead man's words." The meticulously constructed online personas of Anna, Ben, and Chris didn't just crack, they vaporized. The hundreds of praying for you comments under their funeral posts were now replaced. New comments sprouted like poisonous mushrooms. #family first, more like #family last. So the spa was more important than your dad? 50. That's all he was worth to you? Their social media, once a highlight reel of perfect lives, became a public stockade. The real world followed with brutal speed. Ben's wife Laura had always found his practicality reassuring. Now she saw it as a moral disease. She stood in the doorway of his home office, her suitcase at her feet, her voice colder than he'd ever heard it. "I looked at our daughter sleeping last night," she said, "and I wondered what you'd calculate she was worth when I'm old. What's the going rate for a father's love? $50? She left. The divorce papers came a week later. Anna's daughter, Chloe, refused to speak to her. At school, kids whispered, "Is your mom going to the spa instead of your graduation?" A teacher with pitying eyes asked if Chloe needed to talk to the counselor. Anna, frantic, tried to enroll her in a private school across town. The first question on the application, list any recent familial disruptions or notoriety. Chris's professional reputation, built on trust and stability, developed a sudden, rotten smell. A major client, the one who'd texted during the funeral, called, "Chris, we've decided to move in a different direction with the account. Personal integrity is important to our brand. We wish you the best." The call was polite. It was a decapitation. They were pariahs. The invitation stopped. The phone didn't ring unless it was a reporter looking for a comment. The inheritance they had fought over was a handful of dust and a mountain of shame, and they needed someone to blame. They convened at the old house one last time, not to clean it out, but because they had nowhere else to scream at each other. The air was thick with the smell of stale grief and mutual hatred. "This is a disaster," Ben roared, pacing like a caged animal. His life, his tidy life, was in ruins. "My marriage is over. Do you understand that? Over. My daughter hates me," Anna shot back, tears of self-pity streaking her makeup. "I'm a meme in my own town." Chris sat at the head of the dusty dining table, the failed CEO of a failed family. His calm was gone, replaced by a seething, pinpoint rage. His eyes landed on Mike, who was quietly placing their father's few good plates into a box. "You," Chris said, the word a dagger. Mike looked up. "This is your fault," Chris hissed, pointing a trembling finger. "If you had done more, if you had been here more, taken some of the pressure off him, maybe none of this happens, and you—" His voice rose to a shout. "You left that diary lying around for a teenager to find. You were careless. You ruined everything." Ben and Anna turned their venomous gazes on Mike, eager for a target that wasn't each other or themselves. "Yeah," Ben snarled. "You played the good son at the funeral, but where were you when the bills were due? Hiding in your studio?" Mike put the plate down. Very slowly. The gentle sadness that had cloaked him for weeks burned away, incinerated by a fury so hot it was quiet. He stood up straight, looking at his three siblings, their faces twisted by blame, utterly incapable of facing the rot within themselves. "You still don't get it," Mike said, his voice low and shaking. "Do you? You think this is about a diary leaking? About bad PR?" He took a step toward them, and they flinched back from the raw truth in his eyes. "He didn't die from a disease," Mike yelled, the words exploding in the silent house. "He didn't die from being old. He died from disgust. He was sick to death of you, of your calculating eyes, your empty promises, your $50 charity. He looked at the future, and all he saw was more of your waiting, your assessing, your constant, hungry disappointment in him." The room went utterly, profoundly silent. The truth, the final, ugly inheritance their father had left, hung in the air between them, more solid than the wall, heavier than the urns on the mantel. Mike's words weren't an accusation. They were a diagnosis. And in that frozen silence, for the first time, it was impossible to look away from the terminal illness they had all carried. The silence after Mike's outburst didn't bring peace. It just made space for the next more practical wave of misery. The debt, it turned out, wasn't finished with them. It started with letters. Thick official envelopes from collection agencies that didn't care about family drama, only about balances owed. Then came the calls. Anna's phone would ring during her daughter's sullen dinner. A polite, robotic voice would ask for the estate of David Miller. Ben, in his new, too-quiet apartment, would get them during the bleak space between work and sleep. Chris found them waiting in his email inbox. Subject lines cold and clear. Final notice, medical services. The truth, explained by a weary probate lawyer they could barely afford to consult, was a cruel joke. Because they were the heirs, because there was an estate, the house, they were on the hook. The mountain of medical bills David had left, the ones for his mother, the ones for his own final years of wear and tear, that mountain now loomed over them. "We don't want it," Anna had wailed in the lawyer's office, her voice shrill with a new financial panic. "We refuse the inheritance. All of it." The lawyer, a young woman with tired eyes, had shaken her head. "If you disclaim the estate, you walk away from the debt. But you also walk away from the house. The bank and the creditors will take it, sell it at auction for pennies, and you'll get nothing. Not a dime from the sale. If you accept the estate, you take the debt, but you control the sale. You might salvage a tiny fraction after the liens are paid." It was a choice between being cleaned out and being annihilated. They chose to be cleaned out. The for sale sign they hammered into the yellowed winter lawn was the most humiliating act yet. It wasn't a celebration, a moving on. It was a surrender. They priced it low, a motivated seller price, to make it disappear fast. The vultures came quickly. Flippers and investors with calculators for eyes who walked through their childhood home and talked about granite countertops, an open concept, their voices echoing in the empty rooms where their mother had sung and their father had sighed. The sale was a blur of signatures, and the final number, after the reverse mortgage was satisfied, after the medical liens were clawed back, was a figure so small it was laughable. Divided by 4, it didn't cover a month's rent for any of them. The great inheritance, the pot of gold they had squabbled over while their father's body was still warm, amounted to a check that wouldn't even buy a decent television. On the last day, the house was a hollow shell. The furniture was gone, donated or tossed. The walls were bare, marked with pale squares where pictures had hung. The only thing left was the dust motes dancing in the harsh light from the naked windows. The real estate agent, a chirpy woman who knew the whole sordid story from town gossip, waited in her idling car outside with the final papers. Anna, Ben, and Chris stood in the empty living room, not looking at each other. Their shared failure, the only thing left binding them. They just wanted to leave, to seal this tomb forever. Mike stood in the doorway to the den. "I'm taking one thing," he said, his voice flat. Ben didn't even look at him. "Take whatever, it's all junk now." Mike walked to a low shelf that had been built into the wall, forgotten by the cleaners. He reached into the deep, dark space at the very back. His fingers brushed against cold metal and cracked plastic. He pulled out an old cassette recorder, the kind with big, clunky buttons and a carrying handle. It was dusty, with a faded sticker of a cartoon rocket on the side. David had used it for work memos a lifetime ago. Mike blew the dust off, the particles swirling in the sunbeam. He found a faded, unlabeled cassette still inside. His thumb hovered over the play button. Part of him didn't want to. What more could there be? More accusations, more final, bitter lessons? He pressed it. The speakers crackled with age. Then noise, not a voice, but the beautiful, chaotic cacophony of children. Giggles that spiraled into shrieks of laughter. The thump, thump, thump of small feet running on carpet. A young girl's voice. Anna, age maybe 7, singing off-key, "Jingle bells, Batman smells." A boy, Chris, trying to sound authoritative at 10, yelling, "My turn, give it!" Underneath it all, the wheezing, joyful laughter of a toddler, Ben. And then, cutting through the beautiful din, their father's voice. But not the tired, defeated voice from the voicemail. This voice was young, warm, brimming with a love so pure it was a physical ache to hear. It was slightly muffled, as if he was smiling into the microphone. "My children," the young David said, his voice a happy rumble. "My beautiful, noisy children. Always remember to love each other, okay? Promise me." Then a crash and a child's dramatic wail and his laughter again, saying, "Whoops, okay, that's enough recording for today." And the tape clicked off. The silence that followed was total. It wasn't the empty silence of the house. It was the silence of a ghost, of a love that had once been as real and solid as these walls, now just a memory on a brittle strip of magnetic tape. Anna had turned to stone, a single tear cutting through the dust on her cheek. Ben's eyes were squeezed shut, his face a mask of pain. Chris stared at the blank, lifeless fireplace, his body rigid. Mike ejected the tape, cradled the old recorder in his arms, and walked out of the house. He didn't look back. He left his siblings standing in the ruins of the only thing their father had ever truly wanted to give them, which they had, long before his death, already broken beyond repair. The family didn't so much break apart as dissolve, like a clump of wet sand in a receding wave. The tie that had bound them, first obligation, then greed, finally shame, had snapped. What was left wasn't strong enough to hold. Anna moved. Not to a better neighborhood, but to a small, anonymous town 2 hours away where no one knew about spa days or viral shame. She rented a beige apartment in a complex full of strangers. She deleted all her social media accounts. Her phone, which had once buzzed constantly with the drama of motherhood and community, was now eerily quiet. She got a job as a receptionist at a dentist's office, where the most exciting part of her day was scheduling cleanings. Sometimes, in the stark silence of her apartment, she would catch her own reflection in the dark TV screen and flinch, as if surprised by the haunted woman staring back. She never spoke to her brothers. Her daughter, Chloe, chose to live full-time with her father. The loneliness was a heavy coat she wore everywhere, but it was lighter than the weight of everyone's eyes. Ben's divorce was finalized with brutal efficiency. The calculation he was so good at turned against him. Child support, alimony, the splitting of assets. His comfortable, spreadsheet-perfect life was gone. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment that smelled of other people's cooking and echo. He worked longer hours at a job he now hated just to keep up with the payments. The $50 he'd once given his father became a cruel, private joke, he told himself in the mirror each morning. The man who had believed in being realistic was now trapped in a reality he had never budgeted for. A life of quiet, grinding scarcity, and a daughter who looked at him as if he were a confusing, disappointing stranger. Chris's fall was the most public. The veneer of competence shattered. He found no one was willing to hire the man from the diary, the man who suggested shipping his grandmother to West Virginia. The corporate world, which valued image above all, had quietly blacklisted him. He finally took a job as a mid-level manager at a large hardware store. He wore a red vest and helped people find light bulbs and garden hose fittings. His old colleagues, if they saw him, would look away quickly, pretending not to recognize the man stacking bags of mulch. At night, in the small condo he could now barely afford, he would jerk awake at 3 a.m., his heart pounding, chased by dreams not of his father's face, but of his own voice on the phone saying, "We have to be realistic," over and over again. Mike was the only one who didn't run. He had nowhere to run to and nothing to run from. He'd kept the $800 from the envelope. While the others were fighting over the ashes of the estate, he used it to take a certified course in furniture repair and restoration. It was quiet, meticulous work that required patience and care for broken things. He rented a small workshop with an apartment above it. It wasn't much. The floor was concrete, the windows drafty, but it was his. He lived simply. He didn't have much, but he had no debt either, not the financial kind. The other kind, the emotional inheritance, he carried differently. He didn't hide from it. He'd listen to the old cassettes sometimes, the one with the laughter, and he'd feel the ache of loss, clean and sharp. Then he'd get back to work, smoothing out a dent in an old oak table, making something whole again. The following Christmas, the air was crisp and cold, the kind that hurts your lungs. The town was a swirl of colored lights and last-minute shoppers, but the cemetery was still and gray. Mike walked alone across the frosted grass. He carried 2 simple white poinsettias, their plastic sleeves rustling in the quiet. He stopped before a single, modest headstone. David Miller and Helen Miller, it read. Beloved parent and grandmother. It was the basic model, all they could afford. There were no other flowers, no footprints in the frost around the plot but his own. Anna was in her beige apartment, maybe staring at the wall. Ben was probably working a holiday shift for the extra pay. Chris was likely alone in his condo, the silence pressing in on him. Mike knelt, brushing a few dried leaves from the stone. He placed one flower for his father, one for his grandmother. His breath clouded in the air. He didn't pray, he didn't cry. He just sat with the silence for a moment, the vast empty space where a family used to be. "Dad," he whispered finally, his voice barely stirring the cold air. "Your lesson. It costs too much." He paused, the words hanging, looking at the dates carved in stone. Then he nodded, as if answering a question only he could hear. "But I understand it."
What do you think about this story? I think this story is a sharp and sad look at a broken family. I felt deep sympathy for David, who was treated as a burden by his own family. What do you think? Please comment below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting stories.